Canada has just flipped the script on one of North America's most important industries, steel. For years, Canadian steel flowed south across the border, fueling Detroit's car factories and, keeping America's assembly lines running smoothly. But now, Ottawa has slammed the brakes. Instead of sending millions of tons to the United States, Canada has decided to keep its steel at home. The result? Blast furnaces in Hamilton are roaring back to life, while car makers in Michigan suddenly face higher costs and shrinking margins. This move didn't come out of nowhere. It's directly tied to President Donald Trump's new 30% tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. But here's the twist. Instead of simply reacting, Canada has used the moment to completely change the rules of the game. What looks like a short-term trade clash could actually be the start of a much bigger shift in how steel flows across North America. So the big question is this just a temporary storm in steel prices, or is Canada permanently reshaping the balance of power in the industry? When Washington first announced its 30% tariffs, the idea was simple: make foreign steel more expensive and push American companies to buy domestic. But Ottawa responded in a way few expected. Instead of fighting the tariff head-on, Canada redirected its steel back into its own economy. This meant that products like sheet metal, cold-rolled coils for cars, and heavy pipes for construction were no longer automatically destined for American buyers. Instead, they were earmarked for Canadian projects. From car factories in Windsor to new pipelines in Alberta and even the wind turbine towers rising in British Columbia. It wasn't just about slapping a tariff at the border. Canada showed that the steel chain could be broken right at the production line. In other words, before the metal even left the furnace, its destination had changed. For American companies used to a steady cross-border flow of cheap Canadian steel, this was like a supply valve being suddenly shut off, and the effect was immediate. Detroit's assembly lines that once depended on overnight shipments across the border suddenly faced a steel shortage. What had been one of North America's smoothest trade corridors was now fractured. While Hamilton's furnaces are blazing just across the border in Detroit, the mood is very different. For decades, automakers like Ford and Stellantis could count on Canadian steel. A sheet of metal could leave Hamilton in the morning and be stamped into a pickup truck body in Michigan the same day. That smooth flow has now been disrupted, and honestly, the costs are stacking up fast. With Trump's 30% tariffs in place, every ton of Canadian steel entering the United States carries a hefty premium. Analysts estimate this adds up to nearly a 9% jump in production costs for some assembly lines. One Wall Street report even warned that the price of the Ford Bronco could rise by as much as $1,800, and when car prices go up, buyers start to think twice. For Michigan's workers, that's bad news. If pickup sales dip even slightly, automakers may cut back on shifts or delay new investments. It's a sharp contrast to Ontario, where Canadian steel workers are enjoying new job security. In effect, Ottawa's policy has shifted the balance. Canadian workers gain, while American workers risk losing out. This is where the irony hits hardest. Trump's tariffs were supposed to protect American jobs, but instead, they've made United States factories more expensive to run while giving Canada a chance to strengthen its own industry. It's the classic case of a trap snapping shut on the person who said it. And, the political backlash is building. In Congress, members from the Great Lakes region are calling Canada's decision a hidden export barrier, accusing Ottawa of stealing American jobs. But Canada insists it's playing by the rules. And that takes us into the next chapter of the story. Here's the clever part. Legally, Canada hasn't broken any rules. Ottawa isn't handing out subsidies or slashing taxes for its mills. Instead, it's simply prioritizing where its steel goes. Domestic projects first, exports later. This approach falls well within World Trade Organization guidelines. It's not protectionism in the classic sense. It's supply management. A good comparison is Brazil's coffee strategy back in the 1990s. Brazil decided that local consumers would always get first access to beans before the rest was shipped abroad. Canada is applying the same logic to steel. No one can accuse them of dumping or price manipulation. They're just saying we'll take care of our own needs before helping anyone else. And Ottawa is using this smart positioning to play a bigger global game. With the European Union rolling out its carbon border adjustment mechanism, essentially a carbon tariff, Canada has a unique advantage. Its hydro-powered furnaces and investments in clean steel mean Canadian metal has a much lower carbon footprint than United States or Chinese steel. That makes it far more attractive to European buyers. So while the United States is stuck fighting higher costs at home, Canada is quietly building a bridge to new markets. By branding its steel as green and reliable, Ottawa isn't just insulating its economy from Trump's tariffs, it's opening doors in Europe and beyond. This is no longer just a trade dispute, it's a chance for Canada to redefine its role in global supply chains, while the United States grapples with the unintended consequences of its own policies. All right, now let's move into key point 7, wider ripples, energy, defense, and scrap recycling. Steel isn't just about cars and construction. It ripples into almost every sector of modern life, and Canada's shift is now touching energy, defense, and even recycling. Take pipelines and wind farms, for example. Canada's energy sector is booming, and those projects need miles of steel pipe and tons of support structures. By prioritizing domestic supply, Ottawa ensures energy projects don't get stalled by shortages or price spikes. That means Canada can move faster on both oil and renewable projects, while the United States faces higher costs on the very same materials. Then there's defense. Modern warships, tanks, and aircraft carriers all depend on specialty steel. Canada's new supply-first rule gives its defense industry a built-in advantage. While the Pentagon worries about cost overruns due to tariffs, Canadian shipyards and arms manufacturers can count on stable, affordable supply. It's a subtle but important edge in a world where defense contracts are worth billions. And perhaps the most overlooked piece is recycling. Canada recycles over 7 million tons of steel scrap each year, much of which is exported to the United States for remelting. But with tariffs in place, that flow is being rerouted. Canadian mills are now keeping more of that scrap at home, feeding their own furnaces. This makes the domestic steel loop even tighter. Cheap scrap in, affordable steel out. Meanwhile, American mills are forced to source more expensive raw material, raising their costs further. So the fallout extends well beyond auto plants. From energy grids to shipyards to recycling yards, Canada is quietly weaving resilience into its economy, while the United States deals with ripple effects it didn't see coming. Great. Now let's wrap up with key point 8, the bigger picture, a North American shift. When you step back, this isn't just about steel. It's about a fundamental shift in how North America's economy is wired. For decades, the United States was the hub, and Canada was the spoke. Canadian steel, oil, and minerals flowed south, while finished goods and investment flowed back north. Washington set the rules, and Ottawa adapted, but Trump's tariffs flipped that equation. Suddenly, the United States isn't the secure buyer it once was. Canada has had to rethink its strategy, and in doing so, it started carving out independence. Instead of being locked into United States demand, Ottawa is building direct pipelines, metaphorically and literally, to Europe and Asia. This could reshape the balance of power in North America. If Canada can keep its domestic industries supplied, position itself as a green steel leader, and expand its global reach, then for the first time in modern history, it won't be just America's junior partner. It will be a competitor. For the United States, that means more than higher prices. It means a long-term challenge to its industrial dominance. Ports like Detroit and Buffalo are already feeling the slowdown in cross-border shipments. Automakers, defense contractors, and construction firms are reworking supply chains. And every ton of steel Canada keeps at home or ships to Europe is one less ton feeding United States growth. The bigger picture is clear. Tariffs were meant to protect American industry. Instead, they've accelerated the rise of Canada as a rival industrial player. And once those supply chains shift, once Europe locks in Canadian contracts, once Canadian mills expand capacity, it will be very hard to reverse. In other words, Trump's tariff wall may have redrawn the North American economic map, and Canada, for the first time in generations, has the upper hand.